Okay, yeah, this is not my normal attire. Or I guess maybe you could say it is my normal attire. On Sunday mornings, no, normally it's a suit, and I've been accused of wearing a tux. This is so not tuxy, but this is what I was wearing at about 6:30 this morning. Because last night I was supposed to fix pizza quiche, and I didn't, and I'll cover that after a bit. So I was making it bright and early this morning after I took care of the chickens. Can you hear me now? And the picture that's up there right now is so a me picture. And if you can remember back to 3.5 years ago, what was I talking about? You want to get me going off in a direction? Take me with music. I am so going there, and I will talk and I will talk and I will talk. And I also said the number one thing above music that I can talk forever about is talking about God. Don't worry, I'm not talking about it forever today. But when I went looking up this title, Can You Hear Me Now, in my favorite graphics program, where the graphics work is free to use, so I can put that up there in my lesson. This was one of the images that came up, and I'm like, cool, I can use that one because that's a me picture. This is another one of those pictures, and you look at that picture, it's like, what in the world does that have to do with Can You Hear Me Now? It depends. It depends on who you are and what you've experienced. So you don't have to pay a lot of attention to the pictures that are going to come up in this sermon. There's one person here that's going to realize the last picture was so him, except I wasn't looking for him. I was looking for the pictures that came up under this title. So, yeah, that seagull's in a little bit of a hurt, but I think that little itty bitty crab was trying to make sure he wasn't in hurt. And believe it or not, all this crazy does fit in with the sermon this morning. And we're going back initially to Isaiah chapter 5, starting with verse 1 and 2. Now let me sing of my well-beloved, a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. He dug it up and cleared out its stones and planted with it the choicest vines. He built a tower in the midst and also made a winepress in it. So he expected to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. This is the most well-known poem in the entire Old Testament for the Jews even today. This is the poem where God does it all. He makes it the best situation possible. He goes out, as it says, a very fruitful hill. Where do you want it? You want it in rich soil if what you're going to do is put down something you want to grow. God got the best place possible. Not only that, God clears out the stones. He makes it the best soil possible. And then it goes on, and he planted the choicest vines. He went out and found what was going to be the best to grow the best. Except what happened? People made a choice. And in spite of God's best, they produced what they wanted to produce. It's sort of scary that the Jews will hold to this poem as being the greatest poem that exists in the Old Testament. Because in one sense, it is the biggest judgment in the Old Testament. Because what had God done for them? He gave them the promised land. No, he gave them the opportunity of all the best that was offered by the promised land if they would be strong and courageous, go in and obey. Because if you go in and obey and do what I say, you won't suffer the plagues of the rest of the world. You won't suffer the troubles everybody else faces. Why? Because you will be my people and you will follow me. And when you follow me, I will bless you. And you think the promised land is awesome, wait till you see how much I could bless you. Because listen to what he's offering here. I want you to grow. I want you to be the best that you can be. And I'm not talking about being in the army. I'm talking about I'm doing everything I can to make this. And I'll give you a little bit of hint about my sermon. Who's saying this? It's God. Sneaky thing is, we're going to find out it's Jesus as well in a little bit. So, continuing on with Isaiah. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done to my vineyard that I've not done to it or done in it? Why then, when I expected to bring forth good grapes, did it bring forth wild grapes? And now, please tell me, you tell me, I'm going to get these words mixed up no matter what. Please let me tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge, and it'll be burned. I'll break down the wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will lay it waste, and it shall not be pruned or dug, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain on it. This isn't just a simple poem. This is a God poem, because I can't command the rain clouds to stop raining. I don't think anybody in here can do this. That's a God level thing. He's reminding them, as much as this sounds like human stuff, when it comes to preparing the ground, when it comes to picking out the choicest vines, when it comes to pulling out all the stones, when it comes to doing all those right sounding things, we're not talking about a you and me level issue. We're talking about God. Because God is the one who desires all that right for us. God desired all that good for them to become in. And who were they denying when they denied the good they were supposed to be? They were denying God. And that's not something you play around with. And we don't tend to think a lot about the wild versus good in this case. Because, okay, how many of us here live based on growing grapes? We don't. That doesn't quite match up for us. And I'm going to finish off here. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant plant. He looked for justice, and behold, oppression. For righteousness, and behold, a cry for help. Because while we can't get it quite when it comes to that whole grape thing, because I've had wild grapes, and okay, I'd put I'm going to name it wrong because I'm going to name off the duck. Muscadine? Is that the grape versus the muscovy that's the duck, or however that goes? Anyway, I'll put the grape in the same category as the duck. The ducks are nasty, and they will kill other ducks. The grapes, I'm sorry, those grapes are nasty. They are bitter like crazy, and they grow here in Florida. We don't quite get it when we're talking about the grape. We get it when we're talking about the good versus something that so misses the mark. And the reason why I'm going through all of this is because the subtle things that have been in here, like I said, I went searching on, can you hear me now? And the things that are coming up are the things that just came across. Such as, can you hear me now? Last week I asked some people, so what do you think of my preaching? And I got told, in the first couple answers, I got a 9.5 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10. I'm thinking, yes, this rocks. Except they couldn't say anything more. And I'm like, oh, rats. The little bit that they told me is like, you're funny sometimes, and sometimes you're not, and we get that, and that's all good. And I realized, okay, you like my style, but you haven't named anything of my substance. And then I went on to the next person in line, and she goes, yeah, you're really only an 8. It's like, oh boy, here it comes now. And when she said, oh, you're an 8, and by the way, I don't want you to lose sleep over this, but you got some problems. Okay, she didn't say the problems part, but she said that don't lose sleep over it. Now, for those of you that were here last week, guess what she just did? She quoted part of what I said in my sermon. What does that mean? She was listening. Amen, thank you, I appreciate that. And she smiles, all right. Because, yeah, last week I talked about losing sleep over that oven mitt that got thrown away. Because for me, my brain just said, you said fix, and you threw it away. But yeah, sometimes that's the fix. I lost sleep because one of the other things that got said was, Rich, sometimes you talk to all the gray hairs. And I'm like, oh man, I've got that too now. And I get that. And I realized, yeah, I sometimes spend a bit too much time putting it in a context that maybe the older group listens to and can hear and can understand. And when I say can hear and understand, I don't mean understand the words. I mean take it in. Because for the Jews to hear that first story, to hear the poem that everybody knew, because it was that important to them, that God cared that much for them, because they were God's children. That in spite of the fact that it was condemnation of them, it is still the number one poem. That when Jesus talks about the vineyard, all of a sudden everybody listens. Why? Because they know what's coming. Luke 20, starting with verse 9. Then he began to tell the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard, leased it to the vine dressers, and went into a far country for a long time. All he had to say was, and the vineyard was planted. Boom, every ear goes up. They're listening. Not because they care that it's Jesus that's saying it. Because he's already told them at one point in time, not too long back, if we were following John's account, you're only coming because your bellies are getting filled. Oh boy. So the reason you're here is not because of the importance of what I say, it's because I make you laugh. And no, I'm not accusing anybody back there. They were helping me. They came because they wanted to hear, not necessarily, we're possibly still in the bad crowd. Not that, here's how we get right. They came to hear because it's going to be a show. They don't have TV back then. They don't have radio. But everybody's going out to see it. What did you see? You might get to see a miracle. He fed thousands one time. Wouldn't that be something great to see? I mean, if you could come in here and watch somebody levitate 6 feet off of the ground and be able to walk all around him and know he wasn't being hung up by cables, wouldn't that be cool? Oh yeah. Well, back then you don't have TV, you don't have radio, you don't have internet. Although you don't have internet in some respects. Except this is an IT guy saying that. They came out. But were they always listening to take in? Or were they there listening because it's Gators? Yeah, it's right here on the front, right? It's right here on the tie. And of course, my friend who's Go Tennessee is like, no, 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 it's Go Vols. And that's okay. Because why did he bring up the vineyard? It was a can you hear me now? I'm going to tell you one of the other fun things I learned last week. Rich, yeah, you got a problem getting through your sermons. You got so much you're trying to pack into that short period of time because you don't know how long somebody's going to pray. And sometimes if they pray real long, you got to talk real short. And you've only got 1 hour to try to get into us all that you can get into us because that's all we're going to hear. And I thought, thank you for that hammer blow. I'm glad you delivered it instead of me. We come here, and sometimes if all we're getting out of God in a week is what the goofball up front can say, are we really getting what we need to be getting out of God? Remember who I talked about when I'm talking about it from Isaiah. The one who wanted it all to be good for his people. Guess what? It's still the same God. He still wants what's best for his people. He's still working through the words he gave back then. Because the truth is, when is a family a happy family? Is it happy when a kid who's underage is not wed and pregnant? Is it happy when a kid's hooked on drugs? I can go through a whole lot of bad, and we know that's so not the good. But you know what? Don't let that stuff in your house, and it's going to go better. Teach on my word, and it's going to go better. Lay a foundation of the good stuff. And in spite of the bad you will face in life, I'll get you through. God wasn't just talking to Israel. He told us through Paul. The Old Testament, there was the schoolmaster to lead you to Christ. Why? He's the same God now that he was all the way back then. He still wants what's best for us. He is still striving to get us there. If we can open up our ears and listen and hear and apply. And sometimes you have to do something crazy to get the attention. I dropped a big truth, and I don't think they understood the bigger part of it. Question was, why you mention Chad? And I was like, well, you don't know? It's for the same reason I do everything else. Want them to hear me. And I'm bringing up Chad right now because I'm number one failure. Y'all don't know it. And Chad might not know it, but Tara does. Way back when, not 30 years ago, fortunately, Chad was at University City and so was Tara. I didn't know that. Vicky did. She's the one that had to tell me this. Why? Because Vicky was pregnant and I think possibly just gave birth to Matthew about the time that you were pregnant. And she could tell me some additional stuff. It's like, whoa, how much of it did I get? 0. Because as some of you know, I'm an introvert. So when I walk through people, I walk through with the blinders on, trying not to see or be seen. I'm like the ostrich sticking his head down in the sand. I am so not Mr. People person. I fake it royally. But I failed. Because who was one of my peers at that time? Chad and Tara. That's two peers. And as much as I might struggle, and I do mean the word struggle, and strive to figure out how to communicate with Chad, I'm not succeeding. And I'm not putting that on Chad, I'm putting that on me because as an introvert, I don't know how to start the conversation. I even cheat. Your mom said I need to talk to you. What did Mama say? And of course, like, whoa, okay, Mama counts. So he's listening. I can't figure out everybody. I can't figure out everybody if everybody's not working together to become. And I'm just opening up a whole bunch of truth here. What is fellowship about? Is it about the food we come together to eat? Or is it about getting time together to learn more about one another, to learn what helps one another, to strive to become what we all desire to be? I hope it's not the food. I mean, Marilyn makes the most awesome banana pudding there is, and you all will hear about that come next year. And she's like, oh, if I had a gun, you'd be dead. No, she would never say that, and that was a false bad accusation on Rich Kelly's part, but I am getting the finger wag, and I deserve it. Why? Because I got to know Marilyn, and I got to know Billy a bit. And that's not necessarily on me. That was Billy coming up to me at one point in time and said, wow, I could hear you. And I'm thinking, wow, I wasn't too quiet for a change in the pulpit. And he goes, no. It had nothing to do with how loud you were. What you said, I understood. What was Jesus doing? He was calling out the name that got their attention. I'm doing a vineyard. Whoa, he's talking about the vineyard. Everybody's ears came on to hear. And as a minister, what do? I try to communicate God's word in a way people can hear it here. I will use any means I can, including using Chad as an example time and time again, until I figure out how to talk to Chad. And that's on me. Because as hard as I try to communicate with some people, sometimes my brain just doesn't connect well. So I've used examples of sales because I know he deals with sales. I've used examples of managing employees because I know he uses employees in his business. Fact is, I already asked Ryan, last week I gave him the warm-up. I said, okay, Ryan, here's the situation. I only gave him half the situations though. You got an employee and you walk in on the job and you say, okay, there's the stub out there. The stuff's out front. You got to haul in the toilet. You got to haul in the fixtures. You got to haul in the extra pipes. We need this put here. We need this put there. And we got to have it installed by tomorrow afternoon. What you going to do when the guy is there on his phone and you came back 5 hours later and nothing's happened?
You say mess around all you want, but we're not leaving until it's done.
All right. What's the important thing? That it gets done. What you going to do when you come back the next day and you know it's going to take you 5 hours to get it all done in and it hasn't gotten started? What would you do then?
Same thing. Gather around, boys. We're not leaving until it's done.
Okay. What did he just enlist? Everybody he could. It might have been one person he was pointing to and saying, you need to do. But what's the higher priority? Getting the job done. Highest priority with Jesus was getting the message through. He would tell it with stories about lambs. He would tell it with stories about planting seeds. He would tell it with stories about fishing. He would tell it with stories about taxes, about money. You name it, he was going to put it out there, trying to figure out, how am I going to get the message through? And sometimes you come up with the craziest ideas and you work with it and you go forward with it. Because know what? Who was important to God in the first vineyard? Every single one on the vine. Who was important to Christ when he's telling this new vineyard story? Every single one. Why is he doing it the way he's doing it? Because he's trying to reach the ears. He's trying to make sure that, yeah, I talked about a group on the back row. Because the group on the back row told me a whole lot of honest I needed to hear. And the ones I was going to be able to hear it from were those 4 kids. Those 4 kids who've been paying attention to what I've said. Those who could tell me, Rich, sometimes it's all gray. Yep, you're right. Okay, it's gray instead of white now. They told me, and I could hear, because they said it in a way I could hear it. Sometimes we struggle against that. And just to punch forward a bit here, because I'm past my time almost. Then he began to tell the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard, leased it to the vine dressers, went into a far country for a long time. And at vintage time, he sent the servant to the vine dressers that they might give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the vine dressers beat him, sent him away empty-handed. And okay, there were 2 audiences listening then, and the truth is there's 2 audiences listening today. Again, he sent another servant, and they beat him also, treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him also and cast him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Probably they will respect him when they see him." What was God's desire? He wanted the same thing he wanted from the beginning. He wants the vineyard to bear fruit. He's not actually out for the highest amount of profit he can get out of the situation. He wants it to go good. He still wants it to go good. Like it says, see the good. When the vine dressers saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours." So they cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those vine dressers and give the vineyard to others. And yeah, I'm putting up an interesting picture. I thought this one was cool because if you can see it at the top, it says, "Will you marry me?" And he's down there on hand and knee. God wants and is making as good as possible the awesomest request. I want to see it turn good. And when they heard it, they cried, "Certainly not." As I said, there's two groups listening back then. And what they're not saying certainly not about is the consequence that he's talking about, because they haven't heard that part. They heard the vineyard, and they heard what to their ears said, "And you're the one claiming to come in the name of the Lord." Certainly not. Didn't matter that he'd healed, didn't matter that he'd fed, didn't matter that his word was the same word they'd been hearing all along because it came from God and it oftentimes was straight out of the Old Testament. Certainly not. What part of a good marriage don't we want? We want that. What part of being able to grow up, have the opportunity to have a successful life? And by successful life, I don't mean tons of money. I mean being able to have a family that grows up in love with one another, that grows up investing in others of like mind. That's awesome. And it beats the ton out of money. But they didn't want that. They didn't want an answer that put God up here and brought them down to here. And unfortunately, it all went back to a certain man planted a vineyard. This is so not the time. You are so not the answer. You don't want the healing? You don't want the assurance that God is going to take care of your needs of the feeding? You don't want the promise of eternity with God because I can so raise the physical dead. And you want to see something fun? You just wait till Calvary, because what's going to rise up isn't going to work physically. Because a hole that goes through your side into your heart and stays there to the point he says, "Put your hand in my side." The life he offered was greater than what you do when you go, "Clear, waboosh," and it's alive. He offered more. He offered a life Rome couldn't take. He offered the good of the vineyard that they could hear. This one was part of it. And I've mentioned this already a couple times. I've got the stone sitting on my kitchen table in front of my spot. So when I get up in the morning and I sit down with my cherries and my cup of coffee, right there it is. You are enough. And it's hard to put these things into perspective sometimes, because we listen to the world a bit too much and it gives us a different, wrongish perspective. You're enough to be responsible, to make the choice to choose. Because the people he was talking to were part of the vineyard. And we can be today too. Like I said, to choose. Because it is a choice. We are empowered by God to make that choice ourselves. Who chooses if Richard Kelly's going to heaven or to hell? Richard Kelly. Why? By the choice to either follow God or reject him, just like they did there when they said, certainly not. You're enough to do more than just exist. And I'm sorry, that's another whopper lie that the world tells. Or you can't do anything. Oh yeah, you can. When you choose for God, who gives the increase? God does. Who has to act in his will? We do. We choose to do more than just let it happen when we choose to follow God. You're enough to become the better example. I didn't say you're enough to become perfect. You're enough to show that right example, to strive to be what we find in God's word. You're enough to encourage. And I put that one up there because you would be shocked at how much a difference that can make in a person's life when they're face down in the mud. And you come along and say, Rich, man, I am so impressed because you did. And if that had been me, I'd have been struggling not to jack slap the tar out of. You're enough to encourage. Go for the positive instead of the negative. You're enough to take up your cross and follow. He didn't say that saying, oh, this is going to be hard and only those that are strong enough. Everyone has the right to choose, given by God, to take up Christ's example and to follow it. And can you hear me now? All these things that were here, I had different thoughts about different people. And I was so tempted to go through the congregation this morning and start naming off different people. And when I say different, I meant everybody. And the one I was going to fall on my face was with Chad. Because while I can tell you what he does for a business, I can't get inside of his head because I haven't figured out as an introvert how to start the conversation. I had an easier time talking to the 4 kids behind him because I've done stuff with kids and they love soccer and I love soccer. There's one that is an artist. I love art. Sierra loves art. And when they said, and she's a great artist, I'm having flashbacks of, oh no, I'm going to get voted off the island as the artist again, but that's okay. And then another one's a storyteller, and I'm so into storytelling. I could relate. I could hear them. Truth is, it takes effort. And sometimes it takes, like I said the other week, that right nudge. And Chad, if you can give me the right nudge, please do. I respect a ton out of Ryan because I love his kids. I respect a ton out of his wife because she was the one sitting just to the right of me when these kids are telling me all the stuff they're telling me. And Grandma is there next to her saying, tell him what he's getting wrong. And I'm like, oh, you're repeating me, but it sounds so much worse when you're saying it. We have the opportunity, we have the choice. Now, the part we can't miss is, what does God want for us? God wants for us that best. That's why he gave us his best. But it's up to us to make that choice. He's empowered, he's enabled. It begins when we open our ears to hear. to take in, to receive his desire for us. And that's awesome. To know that he wants that for us. It goes forward when we take his son on in baptism and we say yes to what he's offered. But we still have to, like it says up there, we got to choose. We can't just exist. We've got to be daily that right answer. Taking up the cross, following his example, because this world's going to push you down. If you need the prayers of the church, you need to take on Christ in baptism, you're welcome to come as we stand and sing.